which is, well, what does that have to do with the meaning of the poem? The explanation for the sun, moon, and stars is God made the sun, moon, and stars in order to mark the days, the years, and the seasons. Now, seasons is an absolutely giant word in the Bible. It's central to the life of somebody who follows God. It was central to the world of Jesus. So anybody reading this poem, that word seasons planted right in the middle would have jumped out to them, particularly because the poem begins with God creating and ends with God resting. Why is seasons significant? Seasons is a reference to two things. First, seasons is a reference to the Sabbath. Who is one of the original audiences of this poem? A group of Hebrews who had been slaves in Egypt. Now, what was life like in Egypt? In Egypt, they worked 7 days a week making bricks. They had quotas of bricks they had to meet. Bricks, 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 bricks. Every day, all day bricks. In Egypt, your worth and value came from meeting your quota of bricks. You were worth as much as you produced. This was life in Egypt. God rescues these people from life in Egypt, and now he's trying to teach these people what it means to be a human being, not a human doing. God is trying to teach these people what it means to be human. You are not a machine. And in Egypt, their worth came from what they produced. And God is trying to teach these people, your worth does not come from what you produce. Your value does not come from bricks. Your value comes because you are rescued and redeemed children of the one true God. So what does God say? Every 7 days, work 6 days, but then take a day and do no work. Rest, reflect, play, whatever feeds your soul. Take 1 day a week to remind yourself that you are not a machine. So the seasons, first and foremost, is a reference to the Sabbath, the need for a rhythm of creating and resting. Secondly, that wasn't enough. In the scriptures, it's not just every 6 days, then take a day and Sabbath, rest, play, sing, dance, whatever feeds your soul. But there were 7 major feasts throughout the year where God said, play, you will have fun. And so 7 times a year, there were these giant feasts. The Feast of Sukkot in the fall, literally an 8-day celebration. Singing, dancing, adult beverages, whatever. Giant. The seasons, the Sabbath, and the 7 feasts were essentially God's way of saying, somebody get me a DJ. Now, there was, in the culture at this time, there were several other creation stories. The central creation story that was popular among the masses when this Genesis poem emerged essentially taught that the world came about because of conflict. It still survived. You can go to a library and read up on it. Essentially, the belief was that the world came about because this God was mad with this God, and this God was jealous with this God, kind of like big-time wrestling meets soap operas in the sky. And there was a smackdown here, and there was a love triangle here, and out of this conflict came the earth. So the essential belief among most people at the time of Genesis 1 is that the earth came about because this God was upset with this God, and out of their primeval conflict and battle, we got the world we know. This poem charges onto the scene, and it's similar in many ways to those poems. It speaks of land and seas and dirt and creating and shaping and forming and clay. It speaks of many of the same elements, and yet it makes vastly different claims. This poem, arising out of the same culture, says, no. We are not here because of divine conflict. We are here because this one true God who exists in some sort of loving, endlessly giving, generous community, this one God is so filled with joy and beauty and creativity, it's as if this God can't help but create. I mean, this God starts creating things, and then this God compliments himself, like, man, that's good. This God loves to make things so much. This God just makes things and makes things and makes things and just loves to make things. This God makes things and then says to them, okay, now you make more, and you make more. This God loves to make things that can make things. This God makes people in this God's image and says to them, now you take care of it and share in my joy. This poem was absolutely radical in human history because it said, we're not here because of conflict. We're here because of joy. We're the result of divine creativity that said, I can't help but give and spread what I have to more. And so planted right in the beginning of this poem is this word seasons. God creates, God rests, and right in the middle is seasons. So you do the same. Create, but then take time to enjoy what you've created. A couple years ago, I noticed this disturbing habit that my boys had developed when they would say my name. And they were quite young at the time. They would say, Dad, Dad, Dad. I was like, what, do they have a stutter? What's the problem here? And I would notice, Dad, Dad, Dad. And it began to bother me. And then one day, we were playing, I think it was Legos or something. We're down on the floor. And I heard the dad, Dad, Dad. And I noticed it at about the second dad and was fully there by about the third dad. And I realized at that moment that I had been there playing with them. And yet, I had been somewhere else, thinking about a meeting, thinking about things I have to do, thinking about emails, thinking about phone calls to make when I was done with them. And I realized that I was there with them, but I was actually somewhere else. And I realized that my boys had gotten used to their dad being here, but actually being somewhere else. And so over time, they had just realized it takes about 3 tries to get Dad here. In Exodus chapter 24, God says to Moses, Moses, come up on the mountain and stay here. And the rabbis point out that the literal translation, that the word to stay is the word hayah. That means to be. So the verse literally, the command literally reads, Moses, come up on the mountain, and then when you get on top of the mountain, be on top of the mountain. Which is kind of like something from the school of redundancy school. I get it. If I'm on top of the mountain, I'm on top of the mountain. That's where I am. And the rabbis say, oh, no. This command is brilliant. They say God understands human nature. God understands that Moses will spend all sorts of energy getting up to the top of the mountain. And when he gets to the top of the mountain, he'll immediately begin thinking and planning how he's going to get down. And in the process, he won't ever be fully present on top of the mountain, and he'll miss it. Why does this creation poem have this refrain, evening, morning, evening, morning? A Jewish Sabbath begins sundown Friday night. It goes through the night, and then it goes into Saturday and ends sundown Saturday. So a day goes from night to day, from dark to light. And they say this is because a day is a physical picture of the journey God has all of us on, moving from dark to light, moving from ignorance to awareness, moving from error to truth. Does the writer have this refrain in here? Evening, morning, evening, morning, evening, morning, which is a way of saying, wake up, come into the light. Is the writer saying this? In the midst of creation, there's so much to do. There's so much to accomplish. There's so much to build, so much to administrate, so many emails to respond, so many phone calls to return, so much to create, so much to manage, so much to order. There's so much to do. Be careful that in your managing, creating, ordering, be careful that in the midst of creation, you don't become so consumed in your work that you end up creating all the time and you don't spend any time resting. And in the process, you lose something. And to that first audience, perhaps you find yourself back in another sort of Egypt. is the writer saying, don't become a machine who's so caught up in everything you're doing that you miss the joy, the wonder, the awe of being a human in the midst of this whole world God has made. I have learned that what you look for, you will find. If you want to be a cynic, there's plenty to be cynical about. If you want to be a skeptic, there's plenty to be skeptical about.